No, that's fine. I don't have any.
Senator Ludlam, you have the call.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for joining us, and I think this is the first time we've done this by video conference, so it'd be worth working out how much money we save, but thanks for being here. I just draw your attention, no doubt you've seen this, the 2013 Energy Resources of Australia annual report. They noted that if the Ranger 3 Deeps mine is not developed in the absence of any other successful development, ERA may require an additional source of funding to fully fund the rehab of the Ranger project area. Now, you're aware that the company is due to pack up and won't have authority to produce uranium oxide any later than January 2021. The site needs to be fully rehabilitated at Ranger by 2026. Is this the first time that you've seen the company state in that black and white a fashion that they may not be able to fund the rehabilitation unless that project is expanded?
Look, I can't speak on behalf of ERA. In that instance, in terms of rehabilitation, we go through an annual process of defining what is required to rehabilitate the mine as of March 31st each year. That process at the moment sets in place a bond, which to my recollection is in the order of $300 million. In our view, that is sufficient to undertake the works entailed in that amended plan of rehabilitation. So whether or not ERA have commented on that themselves in their own annual report is, I guess, their business.
Well, no, it's your business. They've said that they don't believe they will have enough capital to rehabilitate the site. That must be a concern to you.
Well, as we go through the rehab process planning each year, we are satisfied that the program that's in place is sufficient, and the money that's put aside, which is independently reviewed, is sufficient.
I'm sorry.
So we are satisfied that it's sufficient.
I'm sorry, Mr. McAllister, the company has told you in its annual report that it's not sufficient. So how can you be satisfied that it is?
I can't comment for the company.
I beg your pardon?
I can't comment on behalf of the company. I'm satisfied that the amended plan they have in place is appropriate and the funding that's put against it is appropriate.
The company is saying in their annual report that it's not going to be enough. So how can you sit here and tell us that you're satisfied that it is?
Could you read the quote, please?
Yeah, certainly. So this is from the 2013 annual report, and I think this is the first time they've said this. The ultimate cost of rehab is uncertain. ERA has used its best estimate. Costs may vary in response to factors such as legal requirements, technological change and market conditions. That's fair enough. In addition, if the Ranger 3 Deeps mine is not developed, and as you're aware, that's an underground extension of the Ranger project, if Ranger 3 Deeps is not developed in the absence of any other successful development, i.e. if the company simply closes down their current operations, their open pit mining, then ERA may require additional sources of funding to fully fund the rehab of the Ranger project area. Any inability to obtain additional capital or to monetise assets would have a material impact on ERA's business and financial performance. Before I raise that with you, were you aware that the company had made that statement in its annual report?
Yes, we were made aware of that statement at the recent Alligator Rivers Region Advisory Committee.
Yep.
Now, I assume ERA are talking about their capacity to rehab in the full course of closure.
Yep.
What I'm talking about is the fact that the Commonwealth holds a security bond against the cost of rehabilitation. So I'm satisfied that there is money there to rehabilitate Ranger
even though the company's telling you that that's not the case?
Well, they don't hold the security bond. We hold the security bond.
They're telling you they don't?
Or, sorry, the Department of Industry holds the security bond. So
and
the Commonwealth has the money.
Yeah, the company's telling you it won't be enough, and that doesn't bother you at all?
I don't think they're referring to the security bond that's held by the Department of Industries. But then again, I can't comment for their statement in the annual report. Okay.
So you're not sure what they're referring to when they say they may require an additional source of funding to fund the rehab of the Ranger project area?
Not in their annual report.
Or anyway.
I'm, as I said, I'm satisfied the bond that is held by the Commonwealth is sufficient.
It's $300 million or thereabouts. Whether or not Ranger 3 Deeps is developed, you believe that site could be fully rehabilitated by 2026?
Yes, that's the process we go through on an annual basis is to determine what is required on the 31st of March each year based on what is on the site, what is required to rehabilitate that back to the requirements under the environmental requirements. Now, we get that independently assessed in terms of costing, third-party costings, and those third-party costings.
Who does that for you? Who does the independent assessment?
Department of Industries run the process, so you'd have to ask them who the independent assessor is. We only provide the science into whether or not we believe what's being put up as a plan is scientifically credible.
Okay. When you said you were notified in an ARAC meeting that the company had made that statement in its annual report, did you take that matter up with the company? Did you make any further inquiries? Did you go back and test your own assumptions about the cost of rehab at Ranger?
I have not taken it up directly with the company. It was discussed at ARAC with the company, between the stakeholders and ourselves. In terms of my satisfaction of the bond, that's the third-party assessor who does that bonding exercise. I cannot dispute his values. The science behind the plan, I'm satisfied is sufficient, and the activities that they're undertaking are sufficient to ensure that the site can be rehabilitated. So I'm satisfied with that process.
And you don't know who the assessor is or how they came about their evaluation?
The assessor, as I said, is put in place under contract by the Department of Industries to undertake the job. As I said, you'd have to ask them who the assessor is. I can't recall the name of the specific company that undertakes it, but it's an independent company.
But to be clear, the job of the supervising scientist is to assess whether the rehabilitation plan achieves rehabilitation satisfactorily. It's not the job of the supervising scientist to provide the financial audit, essentially, that is undertaken through the Department of Industry with their responsibility for mining operations.
I would have thought, though, if there's an unfunded liability in one of the country's most important World Heritage areas, it would be of interest to the supervising scientist. A company's just told us that there is.
Well, Senator Ludlam, I think it's safe to say, and this is the first that I've been aware of that quote from their annual report, and I'll happily seek some information from the Department of Industry about their auditing processes, and if need be, some explanation from ERA. Ultimately, I would expect, and the government would expect, that the full legal obligations of ERA to ensure full rehabilitation of the site, as they have committed to, are met, and if it can't be met from within their balance sheet, then one would expect that discussions may be had with some of their key owners who have rather deeper balance sheets.
They do. They've also told their AGM that they have no interest at all in bailing out ERA, but nonetheless, I appreciate that, Senator Birmingham. So you've undertaken there to make those inquiries with the department?
We'll be making some inquiries with the Department of Industry, and if need be, from there with ERA.
All right. So if you're able to then provide us with whatever you come up with, that would be greatly appreciated. Sure. And I suppose if you can, in the course of those inquiries, assess whether effectively the company is attempting to blackmail regulators and the taxpayer. What it looks like to me is they've said, unless we get our project expanded, we can't afford to clean the place up.
Well, it's slightly emotive language. Let's get to the bottom of the facts in the matter. Mr. McAllister's taken us through the fact that there is an independent audit process undertaken by the Department of Industry. So we'll get some information on that. Mr. McAllister's relevant area of responsibility is about what is required to undertake the cleanup, and that is, of course, the work that he assesses each year.
All right, I appreciate that, Senator Birmingham. Thank you. So on 13 December 2013, Minister McFarlane and his NT counterpart, Minister Vestra van Holther, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, announced a task force to investigate the disastrous leach tank failure at Ranger. Can you please provide us with an update on the work of that task force?
The task force is a collective of ourselves, Northern Territory Department of Mines and Energy, the Department of Industries, the NT WorkSafe, the Land Council and the Gundjeihmi Aboriginal Corporation. We've had approximately 8 meetings so far to discuss matters of each of the group's individual investigations. The task force oversees also the independent investigator who is currently investigating not only the ledge tank incident but the wider issue of the plant at Ranger.
Great.
Currently, that independent investigator has reported back to the task force on the current findings they have to date, and I believe we've got a meeting later on today to discuss further issues around the investigators' reports. As you can understand, though, the task force has signed confidentiality agreements, so I'm limited as to how much of the information from that task force I can let you know.
I'm not sure I do understand why that should be confidential. It was a leach tank failure in a World Heritage Area. So what's the confidentiality about?
The confidentiality arises from the legalities of both the Department of Mines and Energy investigation and the WorkSafe investigation, which those two investigations are to remain confidential because they discuss not only the incident but people around the incident.
I find that completely unsatisfying. Is it expected that that investigation will ever be made public, or is it going to remain secret?
I think the indications have been that the independent investigation, the results of the independent investigation will be made public,
That's what
as
I thought.
will our investigation.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, which is appreciated. So, at what point will that confidentiality be lifted? What are the issues that you're working through that you're happy that it will eventually be made public, but you can't tell us about it today?
Just in terms of the details of the findings to date, they are only in draft form, so I cannot provide details on those findings to this point.
So the investigator hasn't provided his report, they've provided a draft report to the task force, is that accurate?
They've provided feedback to the task force, yes.
Senator Ludlam would, of course, be certain market sensitivities to releasing this information. Now, when it's finalised and accurate, then that's the appropriate time to release it. If it's in draft form, then it would be irresponsible to release information that could impact on ERA's share price or otherwise if that information is proven to be incorrect at a later stage. So better to get it right before it's released. And of course, importantly, the processing of uranium remains suspended until all of these matters are satisfied.
So is there anything at all you can...
Also the issue,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was about to say there's also the issue of prejudicing any legal action that may occur. So we don't want to divulge, or the task force doesn't wish to divulge aspects of that information at this point in time.
So you can't tell us what the key findings were, or are there any recommendations that you're able to disclose without hammering ERA's share price any further?
Not at this point in time.
Okay. When is it expected that the report will be made public?
Our report. You're talking about the independent report or our report?
Anything at all. At the moment, we're working completely in the dark. Maybe let's just work through them in serial. When will the independent report be made public?
We're not privy to the release date of that. I would have thought that the independent report would be available in the next few months. But there will be a series of reports that come out. There's a first report around the current status of the key infrastructure, and there'll be no doubt recommendations about other issues that are more long term.
Yep.
So I suspect there'll be a number of different releases in terms of recommendations.
And I imagine the final decision for that will be a matter for Minister McFarlane in conjunction with his NT counterpart.
Yeah, and I can take that up with him in a separate session. Can you just spell out, for the sake of clarity, how many different reports are afoot and who's conducting them?
There are 4 different reports, if I'm correct.
All right, so the independent reviewer or independent report we've just been discussing.
Yes. And
you've
there'll be
got
a report by the Northern Territory Department of Mines and Energy into the incident itself, because they were notified, and under the Act they have to do a thorough report into the incident that was notified.
Yep.
There'll also be a report under NT WorkSafe into the incident, because it's a major safety incident. And there'll be our independent report into the impacts to the external environment.
Okay, thank you. Is it your understanding that all 4 of those documents will eventually be put into the public domain?
I can't speak for the NT Department of Mines and Energy or WorkSafe.
Okay.
They're not required to put them into the public domain, but certainly ours will be publicly released.
All right. And the time frame, you don't seem to want to go any further than saying next few months.
For the independent investigators report?
Will the task force produce a document that aggregates up all 4 of these reports? No, not as such. Okay.
The task force is just a collective to oversee the 4 reports and to ensure that people aren't in contradiction with each other's areas unnecessarily or overlapping.
All right. Finally then, before I move on, when will the OSS report be made public?
Well, we're still working through the last of our sampling. Some of the radiological samples take a little while to process, and that's not something that we can speed up. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Keith Taylor, Office of the Supervising Scientist. So we need to wait for those samples to be processed before we can finalise that. So I would expect, as Mr McAllister said, probably in the next month or 2 we should have that report completed. The release date of that report would be a matter for discussion with, I guess, our colleagues on the task force. Ultimately, we envisage making it public, but the timing will depend on what we're informed.
All right. And is it likely that ARAC would get to see it first before it was put formally into the public domain?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. All right. Can you just confirm for me 2 things? Firstly, that the mine is still in shutdown and is not producing?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Again, not asking you to speak for ERA, but do you know what their expected time of restart of that plant is, or is there no expected time?
Look, there's a process underway where the independent investigator will be providing advice back to the task force as to whether or not they are satisfied key infrastructure is sufficiently of a sufficient nature to restart. They'll be providing a report, or they have provided a report just recently. We'll be discussing that report at the next meeting, and then that will go some way to determining whether or not ERA can restart their process.
Is that a different document to the one we've been discussing? So the one that was put in draft to the task force, or the same document?
That draft document is the same document, yes. It forms part of, or will form part of, the larger overall document.
Okay. And that's about restart. And presumably until all of this work is complete, you wouldn't expect the mine would start up. Who has the final authorisation as to when that plant can start up again?
The 2 ministers who deemed that it should cease operations. So both the Minister for Industries, Commonwealth Minister for Industries, and the Northern Territory Mines Minister will need to be satisfied through that independent investigators report that the mine can restart in a safe fashion.
Sounds like it could still be some months away as well.
I can't comment on that.
Okay. Can you also confirm for us, we got correspondence from the Minister's office that indicates that the environmental impact assessment process for 3 Deeps won't be progressing until the task force investigations are complete, which seems reasonable to me. Is that your understanding?
It might be a matter for Dr. Dripps, I suspect.
Oh, okay, if you like.
Senator, as you may recall, the supervising scientist doesn't lead the assessment of environmental impacts for Ranger 3 Deeps. That's done by the Environmental Assessment and Compliance Division, who'll be here in 1.5 later in the day.
Right.
So that is, the EIA process is necessarily quite a detailed one for a mine of this kind.
Yep.
And so the expectation is that we won't be receiving the next step in that process for some time.
Can I put a bit more of that to you, or would you rather I wait till those folks show up?
I can give it a go.
Oh, it was a fairly simple yes or no. Will that process of assessment remain suspended until the investigations that Mr McAllister and his colleagues are up to are completed?
I would have to have the Minister's correspondence in front of me, but if as you've described it, it says that the assessment won't progress, then that will be what occurs.
I suspect I don't. Can maybe just pop that on notice and I can come back on 1.5 if it's hard to...
We'll come back with
Yep.
the answer in
Good, thank you.
1.5, Senator.
Just finally, Mr McAllister, the tunnel collapse in R3D around 11 February 2014 in the decline, actually it came to light on the 11th of February, I beg your pardon, that there was a rock fall in the decline in November of last year. Can you just walk us through the sequence of events relating to the rock fall inside R3D and when various regulators were advised of that incident?
If the rockfall you're referring to is, we were advised of a 3 metre section that slumped on the side of the wall. We weren't advised necessarily until the recent ARAC, or just before that, there was a mine site technical committee. It came to light, but that's the sort of thing that is of not of a significant enough nature that I would expect to be notified. A 3 metre slump on the side of a wall as part of the construction of a decline process is probably something that needs to be notified to WorkSafe potentially, and I believe that's what occurred. It's not the sort of thing that I would expect to be notified to me.
But can you just be clear about when you were?
Certainly it was raised at the recent Alligator Rivers Region Advisory Committee, and I believe it was raised prior to that in full detail. Questions were asked at the previous MTC in, would have been March, I suspect.
Okay, so you didn't find out about it for 4 months?
We'd heard that there had been a slump in the wall, but it's not the sort of thing that I would expect to be notified directly of.
Okay. So...
And to be clear there, Mr McAllister, that's because it's not the sort of thing that would create an environmental hazard to the park.
It's a safety hazard, not an environmental hazard. Yep, okay.
Hansard won't get nodding, Richard, so...
Yes, that is correct.
All right, but now they have Senator Birmingham acknowledging a nod. Has work resumed on construction of the ventilation shaft? I understand it was reported on the 12th of May of this year, a separate incident of ground irregularities and quite serious subsidence at a ventilation shaft, which is under construction as part of that same project. Are you aware of whether work has resumed on that ventilation shaft, or is that you not have visibility of that?
I certainly have visibility of that. I'm not aware that work has recommenced. I believe ERA is still going through the process of assessing what options they have to put either a new ventilation shaft up adjacent to the existing failed one, or to work through the existing failed one. They're still working through that from an engineering perspective.
They're not having much luck there, are they? The reason I'm putting this to you, I guess, is implications for those latest string of failures for the development timeline, and particularly the assessment process for R3D. Has those incidents and accidents had any impact on your work program as far as R3D is concerned?
Our work program, as in the supervising scientist's work program?
Yeah.
I don't quite understand what work program you're talking about. I can advise that certainly the ventilation shaft is critical for what is called phase 2 of the construction of the decline. Without that vent shaft, they don't have sufficient ventilation to reduce radon emanations to a sufficient level from a safety perspective. Therefore, unless they have the vent shaft in, it will be difficult to progress beyond phase 1, which is almost complete.
All right, I think that just about wraps it up for me. Hopefully one day soon we'll be able to start discussing the final closure of this unhappy piece of infrastructure. Thanks very much for coming on.